Hello, I am Jacques Halbronn. I would like to speak to you on French astrology as usual. And I would like to explain that in fact astrology, a certain type of astrology, is based only on houses, a connection between houses, what we call in French, what a certain houses connects with another houses or is the lord of another house. Connection between houses. And in fact, the real thing which works in astrology, for most astrologers, is the houses, the signification of the 12 houses. And those significations are connected between each other through the system of rulerships and exaltations. There is a cuspid for each house. The cuspid is situated in a certain zodiacal sign. This zodiacal sign is dominated by a certain planet, and this planet may be in the same house, but in general, most probably in another house. For instance, if you have house 2 in Gemini, Mercury is the ruler of Gemini, and if Mercury is, for instance, in house 6, it will connect the 2 houses, etc., etc. Which means that in fact, although you will use the planets, position of the planets, although you will use the position of the signs, it's only a way to connect houses. It's a very important thing to understand. This system of houses is created from the rising sign. The rising sign, the ascendant, will be the basis of the 12 houses. So the rising sign is a zodiacal sign, but in fact, it's before all the starting point of the 12 houses. That's all. So you see, everything which is connected with zodiac or with the planet is in fact only a way to connect the houses between themselves. And astropsychology, when it gives importance to the meaning of the zodiacal signs and to the meaning of the planets, is making a mistake, is not understanding the system. And there is a derivation of the system. The system, before all, is concerned by the connection between the 12 houses. Because the 12 houses, finally, is the most reliable and relevant expression in astrology. It tells you about very concrete situations, persons, is very accessible, is very well easy to understand, much more than it is with the zodiacal signs, symbolism of the zodiac, and the planets, mythology, etc. We have the same system, the same process with the 4 elements. Many astrologers, in fact, consider that the division between the 4 elements is very interesting. You have the air people, the earth people, the fire people, the water people. And then you will not consider the zodiacal signs, will not consider the planets, only as a way to know how many factors you have for each element. If someone tells you you have Earth having a majority, doesn't matter what are the planets which have created this majority in Earth. They just count how many planets, and that's all. It doesn't matter if it is Leo or Sagittarius or Aries. The point is, it has to be a sign of fire or a sign of earth, etc. So in those two examples, you can see that the importance given to this symbolism, to the signification of the signs of the zodiac or to the planets is much less relevant than you could imagine, considering what people do today in astrology. And finally, if we use so many planets, it's only to develop the connections between the houses, historical houses. And it's only because of that that you need all this network fact, you know. The division that astrology needs is the symbols of the zodiac and the symbols of the planets are only useful in reality to order time, not to order space. To order space, you need to use houses and connect houses between themselves. Although the symbolism itself of the houses is a progressive symbol, the first houses concern the first part of life, and the last houses concern the second part of life. So it's progressive in a way. You know? It's very important because the first part of life is, I would say, yin. The second part of life will be yang. It's the youth of the cycle and then the maturity of the cycle. But anyway, this has to do with concrete elements, final. As to the division of time, which is exactly the case in that occurrence, it is different. You can say that, for instance, the zodiac is also a progressive process. Well, although not very clear, not as clear as the houses, but originally probably there was something connected with the cycle of season, of the full season. But it has been made so confusing that it cannot be used nearly. As to the order of the planets, can we really think that they represent different ages of life? In a way, yes. For instance, if Saturn is represented with as an old man, it's probably because it is the last planet before they knew about Uranus, etc. So some astrologers like Jean-Pierre Nicolas has created a whole theory about that. The quick planets correspond to the early ages, and the more the planet is slow, it corresponds to a later age. So astrology has more to say about that, about time than about space. But what I want also to tell you is that there are several ways to build houses, as you probably know. And one very popular way is not to study the rising sign, because it was in many cases considered as a very difficult information to get. So they replaced, in many cases, and quite early, already in the 17th century, they replaced the rising sign by the sun sign. And they said, okay, well, it's what we find in the columns in the newspapers. Okay, let's say that the rising sign is the sun sign is the rising sign, is the ascendant. They call it a substitute ascendant. And we shall build the 12 houses from this rising sign. It's exactly the columns. We make the columns in France like that, and I suppose they have abroad also. Yeah? The third sign after the sun sign will be the third house, etc., etc. So there are other ways to work. For instance, in the 19th century in France, and they were saying, or even before in the 17th century, the astronomical geomancy by Gérard de Crémon, alias Sabioneta, and its commentator, French commentator Luc Salerno. They proposed in 1661, but there were many editions until 1687, I think. They proposed to determine a geometric figure by throwing, or writing on a paper or something, like etching more or less. And it gives a certain sign because there is correspondence between the geometrical figures and the signs, and also with the planets. So you make this figure, you know the sign. The sign you do is the ascendant. And from that you build your 12 houses, etc., etc., you see. So the rising sign is also something you can determine in different ways, in fact, And the word horoscope that you will use often to specify that you have a chart comes from it's an abbreviation of houses of the horoscope. The horoscope is a other name of the ascendant, other name of the rising sign. And from the horoscope, you build the houses of the horoscope. And it has given its name to the whole thing. The word horoscope, as a matter of fact, refers most probably to the stars. This is another problem, So it refers to the stars, to the constellation which were mounting, which were ascending at the time of birth. Not of the planet, not a sort of abstract sign. No, a constellation was ascending, and the word horoscope includes the word scope. And scope, like in telescope, in microscope, means looking at, a scope. So, which has maybe given the word scoop, I don't know, doesn't matter. And so the horoscope, which is a name for the ascendant, is the star, the fixed star that awakes, that arises. You know that there are many more stars than planets. There were only 7 planets, there were thousands of stars. So it was possible to find, at more or less at the time of birth, a star which was coming, which was emerging. While it was not necessarily possible to do that with the planets, especially sometimes they are conjuncted. For instance, Mercury, Venus, and the Sun. So it's more likely that the way to build the 12 houses were based on a certain fixed star, which was not a sign, it was a fixed star at a certain degree, because they were dividing each constellation in degrees. If it was the head of the constellation, or the tail of the constellation, you had different degrees. So you could build from this degree of the constellation the 12 houses by dividing from 30 degrees to 30 degrees. And I will end my lecture on the question of the aspects, which is also another system of connection. Not the rulerships, which connect, in fact, not. When they ask you what is the use of rulerships, people say, oh, it is a way to connect planets and signs. It's wrong. The rulerships is a way to connect houses through a system of connections between planets and signs, which is different. Here, with the aspects, there is also a way of connecting. This time it is connection of planets. But in fact, according to me, it is a connection within a cycle, not within the chart. See? It was possible to, and in France, I have been very much interested and keen in working on cycles and saying that between the 2 planets there were a certain aspect, and it was progressing from from the square to the trine, etc. Like Barbeau, like Yves Lenoble, etc. So you see, the aspects are not made originally to study the connection within the chart. They are made to study how two planets, or one planet and a fixed star, are going to be connected more or less, approaching, separating, etc. This is one point. The second point is, how many aspects do we have? And what is the succession, what is the order of the aspects? And here we have the idea that in fact every 30 degrees you can alternate a good aspect and a bad aspect. The conjunction connects two signs, it connects us two planets in the same sign since it's a conjunction. Then after you have the semisextile or dodectile, which connects two signs of different sex. Then you have the sextile, which connects two signs of the same sex. Then you have the square with two signs which are different in sex. Then you have the trigone, which is connecting two signs of the same sex. Then you have the quincunx, which is very often forgotten, which connects two signs of different sex. Then you have the opposition, which connects two signs of the same sex. And for some reason, and Kepler is also intruding in this system 400 years ago, and introduced quintile, big quintile, 72 degrees, 140 degrees, sesquiquadrate, etc. In fact, and he excluded the quincunx because the quincunx was not a regular figure, geometrically speaking, something like that. But it's not the right criterion. The right criterion is good aspects connect signs of same sex. Bad aspects, difficult aspect connects two signs of several same sex of different sexes, which is quite understandable when you know the relationship between men and women. Without speaking of the taming of the shrew in Shakespeare. And so there is something wrong. Why the quincunx was eliminated? You know, it is not. It doesn't work. It doesn't work properly. You cannot just have a sort of void between the trine and the opposition. And why also is opposition is considered as a bad aspect? It's made of two signs of the same category. If you start saying it's a bad aspect, you break the rule of all the division between good and bad aspect, which is the rule of connecting two signs of the same nature or two signs of a different sex. So you see, you cannot afford to introduce a criteria which is not relevant for the system you want to study and you want to construct and justify. You see? And we could develop, and I will end on that, if you consider the tetrabiblos and the double rulerships that we have, Mercury and has two signs which are in square, Gemini and Virgo. It was the rule. Every planet must have one sign masculine and one sign feminine. So necessarily it could only be bad aspects in a certain way. Saturn connects Saturn in Aquarius and Saturn in Capricorn, which are two different signs. And the quintile is existing also. For instance, Jupiter is in Sagittarius and in Pisces, which is a square. But for instance, Mars is in Libra and Scorpio, which is a quincunx, like Venus in Taurus and Libra. Mars in Scorpio and Aries are in quincunx. Venus in Taurus and Libra are in quincunx. You see? So you cannot really get rid of the quincunx like that without hurting and upsetting the whole system in astrology. Thank you for your attention.